What is your deepest fear, Mr. Cruz?
I was 15 years old when I first watched Coach Carter. I put it on mindlessly, thinking it was going to be just another generic sports movie, hoping to learn a little about the great game of basketball, but somehow ended up with a PhD in life instead. I'm fortunate enough to have a great father who set a great example, but for those that don't, Coach Carter is quite literally the next best thing, especially in a world today where men are more lost than ever and masculinity itself is in crisis. Coach Carter provides a strong, positive example to turn to in these confusing times, and so I felt compelled to make a video about it. About him.
I'm not a teacher. I'm the new basketball coach.
Suicides, baseline.
Now, I cannot teach you the game of basketball until your conditioning is at a level that allows me to do so. Gentlemen, report to the baseline.
That line always stuck with me ever since that first viewing, and I never really understood why. I think I found something profound in the simplicity of doing nothing but run in the lead up to their first game, and the surprisingly transformative effect it had. What Coach Carter was able to achieve in that first week is twofold. One, he humbles them. Ego is what's keeping these players from success, because they view fundamentals as beneath them, although that belief is swiftly run out of them.
Fellas, don't make me commit homicide. I said suicides. Put your hand on the line.
And two, they learn a valuable lesson about bottleneck theory. Just made that up. Which states that the flow of water, success, is determined by the first bottleneck you encounter. For example, you could have all the skill in the world, but if you're bottlenecked by your conditioning and you can barely make it up and down the court, well then that skill is rendered useless. We all have bottlenecks keeping us from our full potential. Usually we ignore them because they're boring to practice, or we don't even view them as bottlenecks because, we have no weaknesses apparently, but that is just our ego deceiving us. So take the time to reflect on your own life and your own pursuits and try and analyze where your biggest bottlenecks are that are keeping you from growing and succeeding, and try to break them open a bit.
As of now, you are a sir. So are the rest of you.
The most profound change Carter implemented during his time at Richmond might also be his most trivial. A subtle change of language that caused a drastic identity shift. These boys possess a bad relationship with respect, not only for others but for themselves, and this leads them to act as their worst self. I mean, why would they respect themselves when the entire town of Richmond is telling them that they have nothing to offer the world? However, after overcoming the initial resistance to the title of Sir,
you're not a sir. Or are you a madam?
Something changed at the subconscious level. A seed was planted. The boys transformed from a bunch of insecure, infighting losers who would pass blame around like a hot potato.
He clowns you, dog.
Yeah, he better shut
He had you unlock the whole game.
Yo, Lyle, why don't you shut your mouth before I close it for good?
To a secure, tight-knit, supportive group of winners.
Who's gonna win this game? 1, 2, 3, Richmond!
This is obviously achieved alongside a lot of hard work, but I think it's this simple gesture of respect that gains the trust needed to coach these boys into winners. So be mindful of the language you use surrounding yourself and others, because the way you treat others is a direct reflection of how you feel about yourself.
I see a system that's designed for you to fail.
The picture that is painted of the Richmond area is one of poverty and inequality. These boys are in an environment that is designed to keep them from succeeding. I mean, their principal doesn't even think success is a viable option for these boys.
Now, in my very educated opinion, you have 15 players on your team. You'll be lucky to graduate 5 of them.
Well, I'm sorry, ma'am, but I don't agree with you.
It isn't until Coach Carter explains this truth of life and encourages them to succeed anyway, to not be a victim of circumstance, that they start to strive for greatness.
Now, I want you to go home and look at your lives tonight. Look at your parents' lives. And ask yourself, do I want better?
Now, not all of us live in poverty or face extreme adversity. Some of us are actually extremely privileged by comparison. But doesn't matter how privileged you may be, in today's world, we are all designed to fail. Now, not to get too Andrew Tate on you, but we are living in a matrix, except it's not one where there's some machines farming us for energy, but rather corporations farming us for attention. because where attention goes, money follows. Our environment endlessly encourages us to live as our worst self, distracted, isolated, insecure, unhealthy. But this is the world we live in, and it's the only one we've got, so I encourage you to succeed anyway. Now, this does take quite a bit of discipline, but it doesn't have to be lived on hard mode. Redesign your environment to serve you. And if the thought of giving up your comforts and vices scares you, that's because you've been made dependent. That's what keeps you such a loyal customer. It took me 3 years to completely sever the ties to cheap pleasures of the modern world, and I'm by no means perfect, but I can finally engage in meaningful activities on a regular basis, which once eluded me.
You've achieved something that some people spend their whole lives trying to find. What you achieved is that ever elusive victory within.
Earlier in the movie, Coach Carter overhears the boys fantasizing about being state champs, and he asks them a simple question. Do you remember the state champions from last year? No one knows the answer. In this simple exchange, my entire concept of success collapsed. I realized we're all chasing a fantasy that doesn't exist. That once we reach this milestone, all of our problems will disappear. That once we reach this status, we will be loved. That once we create our masterpiece, we will be remembered. But in reality, no one cares. No one. Outside of the few closest ones to you, no one is paying attention because they're so fixated on their own life, feeling the same way, that they barely notice your existence. And yet we spend so much time and energy trying to signal success to an empty auditorium. So I've now reframed my idea of success to the pursuit of the ever elusive victory within, because that victory is real and that victory is yours. The way to differentiate between the two and get off the hamster wheel is if the outcome of your goal is in the hands of others, it's external success. But if it's in your own, then you're on the path to that victory within. So I'll give you an example. For this YouTube thing, if my goal was something external, it'd be something like, I want to hit 1,000 subscribers. You know, that's in the hands of others. Whether they subscribe or not is completely outside of my control. So instead, my goal for this is simply to make 50 videos. 90% of people that start a YouTube channel don't make it past 3. So if I can hit 50, then I'll have made a sufficient effort that I can be proud of. And the beauty of it is it's completely untethered to any sort of external validation. Whether or not those 50 videos all flop, or by the end of it, I'm an overnight success, it doesn't matter. I will have my victory. So again, whatever your pursuit is at the moment, take stock of the goals within that you've set for yourself and sort them into either category. And if you've got a bunch of them in the external column, maybe try to reframe them to put them in the internal one.
What is your deepest fear, Mr. Cruz? That you're inadequate?
This may just be the most important question to understanding your psyche, and yet most of us don't know the answer. And if we do, we repress it so much that we forget it so that we don't have to confront it. The usual cop-out when asked this question is like spiders or heights. But these are surface level fears. So in order to truly understand your psyche and what drives your behavior, you need to look inward and deeper to discover who you are. In my case, I used to think my deepest fear was never reaching my goals. To try with all my might, but realize that I was simply never good enough to begin with, that I'm not special, I'm average just like everyone else, lost in a sea of mediocrity. But I've found one deeper, to get to the end of my life and realize that I never even took one step on the path that I saw for myself because the mountain seemed insurmountable and I was scared of other people seeing me fail. For my dreams to amount to nothing more than some childish notion that I pretend to forget, living a life of quiet desperation. And so the fear that once coated the mountain has now shed. And I now find solace in the path, knowing that either way, win or lose, I will have my answer. But not only do we fear the dark, we also fear the light. We fear the heights we can rise to if we ever let go of the dead weight chaining us to the ground. We'd rather fall from the second floor than the penthouse, so we stifle our growth, stay in our bubble, forever attached to the status quo. This is the mindset of the players and the entire town of Richmond, in fact. As they've lived in the vicious cycle of poverty so long, they don't actually know how to live any other way. Coach Carter manages to break this cycle, however, by constantly challenging their limiting beliefs and encouraging them to think bigger, imagine more for themselves than they've been told they're allowed. And Cruz is the perfect example of this. He only ever saw himself following in his cousin's footsteps, becoming a drug dealer, and it took seeing his cousin die, spoilers, to shake him out of apathy and confront what he really wants out of life. In this moment of crisis, he turns to the only man that's ever offered him a different path. It only takes one person to believe to change a life. So if no one's ever told you before, I'll be the first. I believe in you. You know what I see? I see a system designed for you to fail.